On the last morning of the dry season, the Alpha King of Redgate stood up in his own hall and gave away the woman he had promised to make his Luna. He did it in front of 400 people. He did it without raising his voice once. Then he did the thing nobody in that hall expected. He came down off the high seat, and he put his own knife into her hands, hilt first, the way a man arms someone he is frightened for. He gave her the best gray mare in his stables. He gave her a train of waterskins that Redgate could not spare, and 6 riders of her own choosing, and a written word that said Talia Marek left those walls owing nothing to any soul inside them. And then he said the sentence that took the floor out from under her. The claim was ended. At the next full moon, he would swear the iron oath with Iskra Bataar of the Sunmark, whose riders numbered 8,000 and whose family held the ninefold springs, and the oath allowed no prior claim, and it allowed no explanation. That was the condition, and it was the cruelest part of the whole arrangement. He could not tell her why, not one word of it, not to her, not ever, or the compact voided, and 12,000 people behind those walls would be dead of thirst before the first snow. So he said nothing. He stood there with his face shut like a gate in a siege, while she waited for a reason that never came. Talia rode out under the red arch at noon. She did not cry, because she had counted the men on the wall, and there were 11 of them watching her go, and she had decided a long time ago exactly what she would never hand anybody for free. At the top of the first rise, she turned the mare around and looked back at the hold, and she made a vow of her own, out loud, to nobody at all. She said she would come back to that gate. She said that the next time she stood in front of it, she would not be standing there alone. Water was the only king on the grass sea, and a man named Sevrin Baird owned the water. Neither of them knew that the bride he traded her for was already working, in secret, to save her. Chapter 1. 22 days before the Alpha King of Redgate gave her away, Talia Marek came in off the grass with good news knotted into her tally cord and a bad taste in her mouth. She had a knot in the cord for every one of those things. Talia counted. It was the plainest fact about her, plainer than the dark auburn braid down her back or the pale gray-green eyes she had from a mother she barely remembered. Paces, horses, days, wagons, ribs on a hungry animal, guards on a wall. 26 years old, and she had never once walked past a number without picking it up and putting it in her pocket. Redgate rose out of that flat country like something dropped there by accident. Red stone walls, a red stone arch, and at the heart of it the great well, 200 feet down through rock into a cold vein that had never failed in the memory of anybody's grandmother. 12,000 people lived behind those walls because of that well. Talia dropped her saddle in the yard and drank straight out of the day bucket. Then she stopped. She held the water in her mouth longer than a thirsty person should, and she spat it back into the trough. Iron, she thought. It tastes of iron. "You are back 4 days early," Emrys Thorne said. He was 32 years old, black-haired, cut close, with the gold-amber eyes that ran in his line and gave away nothing at all. He had a face like a closed ledger. Talia had spent 2 years learning to read the small print on it, and she had gotten good. "There is water at the elbow," Talia said. "Good," Emrys said. She laughed, and something behind his eyes eased, and that was the only sign he ever gave that he had been anxious the whole time she was gone. She had learned to look for it. It was, she thought, the most valuable thing she had ever learned. At the spring feast he had stood up in front of the whole pack and claimed her. Not quietly, and not with the careful hedging Alpha Kings usually use when they pick a woman with no bloodline, no cattle, and no allies to bring. He said her name, and said she would be Luna of Redgate at midsummer. And when a man at the back asked what family she came from, Emrys said, "Mine," and sat down. Nobody asked a second question. That night, Up in the tower room where he kept his ledgers, she sat on the wide stone sill with her boots off and watched him work. He wrote everything down, every debt owed to Redgate and every debt Redgate owed. He kept a whole book of nothing but promises, and once, when she teased him about it, he said that a promise you do not write down is only a mood. "Emrys," Talia said, "the well tastes wrong." His pen stopped. He did not look up for a moment, and then he did, and she watched him decide to take her seriously. He never once told her she was imagining things. That was the other most valuable thing. "How wrong," Emrys said. "Iron, faint," Talia said. "And there is a ring of dead grass at the downhill seep, 90 paces across. It was 40 in the spring." Emrys closed the book, came around the table, took her face in both hands, and kissed her the way he did everything, without hurry and without any doubt at all about where he was going. His palms were rough from rains. He smelled of cold stone and horse, and the smoke of a fire he had not sat down beside all day. "Then we dig a test shaft in the morning," Emrys said against her mouth. "That is the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me," Talia said. "I am saving the rest," Emrys said. He did not save all of it. The lamp burned down while the two of them forgot about the well entirely, and for a few hours the grass sea was very far away, and there was only the dark room and his hands and the low sound of her name said into her hair, like something he had carried around all day and could finally put down. At dawn, the horn went off on the west wall. Talia was on the parapet in her shift with her braid coming apart, and she counted before she thought, the way she always did. 9 wagons, 62 mules, a banner of white and gray. Water wagons, she thought. Nobody brings water to Redgate. Redgate has water. "Who is that?" Talia said. Beside her, Emrys had gone very still, and for the first time in 2 years, she could not read one single thing on his face. "That," Emrys said, "is Sevrin Baird." Chapter 2. Sevrin Baird came through the red arch of Redgate with 9 wagons of water nobody had asked him for. He was not a wolf. That was the first thing Talia noticed from the gallery, and it interested her, because a man who is not a wolf does not usually walk into an Alpha King's hall at the head of his own procession and sit down before he is invited. Somewhere past 50, thin, pale sandy hair going white, eyes so light a blue they looked almost empty. No weapon. He carried a ledger and a set of small brass scales and set them both on the table like a man laying out his tools. "Alpha King," Baird said, "I am sorry to arrive with bad news. Your well is finished." "I trade water on the grass sea. It is my whole life," Baird said. "I know the taste of every vein under this country, and I know what one sounds like when it is dying. Yours has begun to draw off a bitter layer. It will be undrinkable in 90 days. You will want to dig. You should. It will not help. There is one vein under Redgate, and you are standing on the end of it." "Say your price," Emrys said. That was all he said, and Talia watched the hall turn toward him and thought, he already knows. He has known since the horn went off. 2 things exist on this grass, water and salt, Baird said. I hold the deep wells from the gray pan to dry anchor, and I hold the road that moves the salt, and I have held both legally for 19 years under a charter your father signed. To water Redgate off my wells by wagon for 1 year is a price you cannot pay. I did the arithmetic on the ride in. You would be selling children by spring. Then you did not come to sell me water, Emrys said. No, Baird said. I came to sell you a marriage. The Sunmark Horse Court holds the Ninefold Springs, 4 days east of your wall, Baird said. Their heir is Iskra Bataar, 29 years old, unmarried, and she commands 8,000 riders in her own name, which is 6,000 more than you have. Bind your house to hers, and Redgate drinks forever. I broker the oath and take my cut in salt rights, which costs you nothing you are currently using. The Iron Oath is an old form. It is the only one the Sunmark will take from a walled people, because walls have betrayed them before, Baird said. 3 clauses. The first, both houses ride to each other's defense. The second, the oath admits no prior claim on either party. None. Not a betrothal, not a promise made in front of a pack, not a claim spoken at a spring feast. And the third is mine, Baird said. Silence. My terms, my arithmetic, and everything said in this hall stays inside your own skull. Not your counsel, not your quartermaster. A brokered oath that gets explained becomes a thing people negotiate, and I do not negotiate twice. He closed the ledger. Break the silence, and the compact voids the same hour. And then you are simply a man in a stone box with a dead well and 12,000 thirsty people. And I will not come back. Talia did the arithmetic because she could not stop herself, because that was what she was. 12,000 people. 90 days of sweet water. 2,000 riders against 8,000. 1 well and 1 man who owned every other well within a month's ride. There is no version of this where he keeps me, she thought. She went down the stairs fast and out through the kitchen yard into the sun. Baird's wagon stood in the outer court with their teams still hitched, and she walked along them the way she walked a game trail, because looking at things was the only thing she knew how to do when she was frightened. The wheel hubs on the third wagon were crusted with a gray-black grit, thick as barnacle. She scraped a little onto her thumb, touched her tongue to it, and jerked back. Salt, but not table salt. Bitter, metallic, faintly oily. She wiped her thumb on her leg twice. Black salt, she thought. Why would a water merchant haul black salt in a water wagon? That night she climbed the tower stair and found 2 of his own guards at the ledger room door, which had never in 2 years been shut to her. "Let me by," Talia said. "I cannot," the guard said, and he would not look at her, and that was worse than the answer. She stood there a long time, long enough to hear, through 3 inches of oak, one single crash from inside, as if a man had swept everything off a table with his forearm. Talia walked back down with her arms wrapped around herself, and one thought turning over and over. That was not the sound of a man getting what he wanted. Chapter 3. 22 days later, on the last morning of the dry season, they came for her at dawn and asked her to put on something good. Talia wore her riding leathers instead. She had spent 3 weeks in a hold that had stopped meeting her eyes, and she had decided that if this was going to happen, she would at least be dressed for the road. She had tried 4 times to speak to him, she counted. The last time was in the corridor outside the granary, where he stopped dead at the sight of her and stood there for the length of 6 breaths, and then walked past without a word. She heard his stride break on the stair afterward, one uneven step, like a man losing his footing on a flat floor. Fight or run, she had thought, over and over in the dark. Those are the only 2 honest choices anybody ever has. She had chosen fight 4 separate times, and 4 separate times the door had shut in her face. There is a point where a person stops being brave and starts being a fool, and Talia Marek had never once been a fool. Iskra Bataar walked the length of the hall alone. Tall, broad through the shoulder, black hair in a dozen braids strung with small silver rings that chimed when she moved. Eyes so dark brown they read as black. She had a horn bow across her back and did not take it off in another ruler's house, which was either an insult or a statement, and Talia could not tell which. Iskra stopped in front of Emrys, looked at him for exactly as long as courtesy required, then turned her head and looked at Talia. She is sizing me up, Talia thought. She is looking at what she is replacing. She would spend 4 months believing that. She was wrong about it in every particular, and the day she found out would come very close to knocking her down. Then Emrys stood. "Talia Marek," Emrys said, and his voice went to the back of the hall without effort, the way it always had. "At the spring feast, I claimed you before this pack. Today, I end that claim. Redgate will swear the iron oath with the sun mark at the full moon. The oath admits no prior claim. There is nothing more to say about it." Talia stood absolutely still. She had thought she was ready. She had rehearsed it 100 times in her head, and none of the 100 versions had prepared her for how quiet it was, how ordinary, how much it sounded like a man reading out a change to the grain allowance. "You will not leave here poor," Emrys said. "The gray mare is yours, Kestrel. She is the best animal in my stable, and I will not hear an argument about it. 10 skins of water and the mule to carry them. 6 riders of your choosing, and they may come back afterward without penalty. And this." He came down off the high seat, crossed the floor, and drew his own knife, the black-handled one his father had carried. He turned it around, put the hilt in her hand, and closed her fingers over it with both of his. His hands were not steady. Nobody else in that hall could have seen it. Talia felt it, in her fingers, for 2 full seconds. "Talia Marek leaves Redgate owing nothing," Emrys said to the hall. "Not a coin, not a day, not a word. Any man who says otherwise answers to me." "Emrys," Talia said, "look at me and tell me you want this." Something moved behind his eyes, something bad, and she watched his jaw set. "The oath admits no prior claim," Emrys said. "That is not what I asked you," Talia said. "It is the only answer there is," Emrys said. And that was the whole thing. 2 years and a claim in front of the pack and a midsummer that was never going to happen ended with a sentence about a legal clause. She did not run and she did not stumble, and she got all the way to the arch before he spoke again from behind her, low, in a voice that did not carry past the first 10 rows. "Talia," Emrys said, "ride north, not east." It made no sense at all, and she was too far gone to chase it, and she stored it anyway, because she stored everything. Talia mounted the gray mare in the outer court in front of 100 Sunmark riders and rode out under the red arch at noon. She got to the top of the first rise before she let herself look back. The hold sat small already in the flat gold country, with the heat shimmering off the wall. She counted the men on the parapet, 11, all watching her go. And on the tower above the arch, 1 more, not moving at all. Talia sat her horse and said it out loud, to the wind and the grass and nobody. "I am coming back to that gate," Talia said, "and I will not be by myself." Then she turned Kestrel's head north, and the last thing she heard from the place she had meant to spend her life was the sound of the great gate coming down. Chapter 4. By the second evening on the grass, Talia had given away everything Redgate sent with her except the horse and the knife. "Count it with me," Talia told them. 10 skins and a mule is 4 days of drinking for a family, and there are 12,000 families behind that wall with 90 days of sweet water left. Take it back, and do not tell anybody I sent it." On the second night, she took her wolf for the first time since the spring feast, because a wolf needs less water than a woman, and because she wanted very badly to stop thinking in sentences. Her wolf was lean and red-brown and not large, and she ran the dark grass with the mare walking loose behind her, and for a few hours the arithmetic went quiet. On the 3rd afternoon, the seep at the elbow had gone to damp mud and a smell of rot. She stood over it with her hands on her knees for a long minute. Then she made herself walk the ridge, because a scout does not stand and stare at a dry hole. 200 paces along, she found a cairn. It was a good one, low and tight, the kind a careful person builds, and it had not been there in the spring. Talia took the top stones off. Underneath, packed in dry grass, were 4 water skins, a bar of hard fat and grain, and a tin of the coarse salt that keeps a rider upright in heat. She turned the nearest skin over and stopped breathing. Burned into the leather at the neck, small and neat, were 2 short strokes and a slash. She had seen that mark on every grain sack and every water barrel in Redgate for 2 years. It was the quartermaster's stamp, and it belonged to a broad, gray-haired, deeply unimpressed woman named Nell Ott, who had run those stores since before Emrys was old enough to sit the high seat. Talia sat on that ridge in the last of the light and did not let herself think the thought. Because if she thought it, and it turned out to be wrong, she was going to come apart where nobody could see it, and she had a horse to keep alive. Ride north, he had said, not east. The wolves found her on the 5th night, 9 of them, out of the dark grass on 3 sides, silent and spread wide, the way people hunt who have hunted together for years. Talia put her back to a rock and drew Emrys's knife and did not bother shouting, because there was nobody for 80 miles. The largest shifted first and came up out of the grass as a man about 30, sandy brown hair, hazel eyes, an unstrung bow across his shoulder, and a careful, unhurried way of putting his hands where she could see them. "That is a Redgate knife," the man said. "And you are 11 days north of Redgate on 1 horse. That is either very stupid or very interesting." "I am hoping for interesting," Talia said. "Bren Scarn," the man said. "Outriders of the Windmane, and you would be the one they threw out." The Windmane camp was 400 hide tents and 1,100 horses strung along a shallow watercourse, and Talia counted it on the way in and did not like a single number she got. And every water barrel on the picket line standing in the shade with a guard on it, and guards on water barrels mean the same thing everywhere in the world. They brought her to the fire in the middle, where an old man sat with a blanket over his knees. Hallen Scarn was 61, Altha of the Windmane, iron gray hair to his shoulders, 1 brown eye and 1 gone milky white years ago. He looked her over with the good one. "Redgate's cast off," Hallen said. "That is the short version," Talia said. "Give me the long one, and I will decide whether you eat," Hallen said. "You were their chief scout before you were their almost Luna," Hallen said when she finished. "So tell me one true thing about this grass, and I will feed you tonight." "The sedge is dropping 2 fingers a week, and it has never dropped in autumn in the whole time I have counted it," Talia said. "Redgate has barred you off the lower fords. You will try the upper ones, and they will be mud before you get there. The seep at the elbow has failed, and there is a wild herd of 200 head between here and that ridge that is not drinking anywhere I can find, which means they know about water that I do not." "Feed her," Hallen said. Somebody put a bowl in her hands, and she ate the first hot food she had had in 5 days. "You should know what you have walked into," Hallen said when the bowl was empty. "The Windmane does not winter on open grass. We winter at Longwater, and to reach Longwater, we cross the sedge at the lower fords, and Redgate has closed them with 200 spears under the Alpha King's own seal. So at the turn of the season, we march on Redgate, because the alternative is 4,000 people and 1,100 horses standing in the snow with nothing to drink." Talia set the bowl down very carefully. "And I would like to know," Hallen said, "whether the woman that hold threw away is going to tell me where its wall is weakest." Chapter 5. She did not give Hallen Scarn the weak place in the wall. She gave him something better, and it took her 6 weeks to prove it was better. "No," Talia said that first night, with the whole fire listening. "And not because I am carrying a torch. Redgate's wall is 30 feet of red stone, and you have no engines and no time. If I told you where it was thin, I would be handing you a nice place to die. Your problem is not the wall. Your problem is water. Fix that, and the wall stops mattering." "And can you fix water?" Hallen said. "I can find it," Talia said. It is the only thing I have ever been good at." So she went to work. She found them a route west of the herd trails, 6 days longer and 2 springs richer. She stood in a dry watercourse for an hour, looking at the way the sedge grew along one bank and not the other, then made 4 men dig, and at 9 feet they hit water. And in the second month, she broke a roan stallion named Thistle, who had put 3 riders on the ground and one of them in a wagon. And she did it by walking him in a circle for 2 days and talking to him about nothing until he got bored enough to be curious. The Windmane were a horse people before they were anything else. After that, they stopped calling her the Redgate one. They did not do their leadership the way Redgate did it either, and it took her a while to understand how. 2 seats, Brenskarn explained, riding beside her. The Alpha holds the warband and decides who we fight. The Luna holds the road and decides where we go, how long we stay, and which water we drink. If the 2 of them disagree about where the pack puts its feet, the Luna wins. Every time. It is not a wife's title with us. It is a job, and you get it because the pack says so. And my father has not filled it since my mother died 6 winters back. They named her at the end of the 8th week, at the fire, under a moon so low it turned the whole grass silver. Hallen Skarn stood up with the blanket falling off his knees and said the pack had been asked tent by tent and that the tally was not close. "Talia Marek," Hallen said, "you will hold the road." Then somebody at the back howled, and the whole camp took it up, 4,000 voices going into that huge silver sky, and Talia shifted where she stood and ran the outer picket line with 1,100 horses stamping on either side of her, and for the first time since the red arch closed, she felt something in her chest that was not a stone. Luna of the Windmane. Not a wife, not a consolation, a job. She lay awake most of that night because the arithmetic had not changed. 4,000 Windmane, and a winter ground on the far side of a river Redgate had closed with 200 spears. 12,000 people inside Redgate with a well going bitter. 2 peoples, 1 water, and somewhere out on the salt road, a polite man with brass scales who owned every drop that was not already spoken for. And she understood the shape of her new office about the 3rd hour before dawn, and it went through her like cold water. The Luna holds the road. The Luna decides where the pack puts its feet, which meant that when the Windmane marched on Redgate at the turn of the season, it was not going to be Hallen Skarn who gave the order. It was going to be her. Chapter 6. 9 days after they named her Luna, the first blood went into the Sedge River, and Talia got there in time to stop the second lot. It happened at Widow's Ford, a wide, shallow crossing under a chalk bluff, and it happened the way these things always do, which is by accident. A Windmane water party went down to fill skins on the near bank. A Redgate picket was posted opposite with orders to let nobody cross. Talia came over the bluff on Thistle at a flat run, put the roan into the middle of the ford, turned him broadside between the 2 lines, and roared at both of them at once. "Hold!" Talia shouted. "Windmane, back up the bank! Redgate, ground the spears! Nobody here wants this, and every one of you knows it." For 3 seconds, it could have gone either way. Then a Redgate rider grounded his spear, and the rest followed. She knew the one bleeding, of course, about 20, wide and freckled, with a slice down his forearm running red into the water, and his name was Pell Ott, and she had taught him to sit a horse when he was 14. "Get your arm out of the river, Pell," Talia said. "It is low and dirty, and you will lose it." That was when she looked up at the bluff. He was sitting a black horse at the top of it, alone against the sky, and even at that distance, she knew the set of those shoulders, the way she knew her own hands. Talia did not move, neither did he. She counted while she waited, because counting was the only way she had ever known to hold still. 41, 42, 43. Then Emrys Thorn raised one hand, and every Redgate spear on that bank turned and walked back from the water. No shouted order, no horn, just a hand. He had pulled his own line off a ford he had been ordered to hold. Then he rode down the far side of the bluff and out of sight without sending a rider or saying one word. He called them off, Brenskarn said, coming up beside her. Then why in the name of every dry well are we here? The Redgate Herald came in 3 days later under a white branch, and he was not alone. There was a second man at his shoulder in a plain gray coat, unarmed, carrying a small ledger, and Talia knew the pale sandy hair from 100 yards out. The herald read the closure of the lower fords under the Alpha King's seal. Then Sevrin Baird walked his mule forward 3 paces and said with enormous courtesy that if the Windmane found themselves short of water this winter, his wells at the Grey Pan were open to any people able to meet the price, and that he would be glad to discuss terms in a lean season, when a person's terms tend to improve. He is counting the horses, she thought. He is doing exactly what I do. He is standing in a camp of 4,000 hungry people and enjoying the arithmetic. Holland Skarn stood up out of his chair with his good eye gone flat and told the herald that the Windmane would cross at Widow's Ford at the turn of the season with every soul and every horse it owned, and that Redgate could stand aside or stand in the river. The camp roared. Talia did not. She was watching Sevrin Baird, and Sevrin Baird, in the middle of 4,000 people howling for a war, put his ledger away and looked deeply, quietly satisfied. After the herald left, Talia stopped grieving and started counting, and the 2 things turned out to be much closer together than she expected. Every one of them sat on the northern arc of the Windmane's road. Every one had been built inside 4 months. Every one held 4 skins, a bar of fat and grain, and coarse salt, which is what a quartermaster packs and nobody else. And every skin carried Nell Ott's stamp burned into the neck, which left one explanation standing. Redgate was feeding the Windmane, on purpose, in secret, while its own well went bitter, and its own king barred the fords with 200 spears. And then, because she was honest even when it cost her, she made herself say the rest of it. Ride north, not east. He had sent her up the exact line the caches were on. She put her hands over her face and did not finish the thought, because she had been trying to finish it for 4 months, and every time she did, the memory of him saying the oath admits no prior claim came along right behind and took her legs out. Hope is not free, she thought. Hope is the most expensive thing on this grass, and I cannot afford to be wrong twice. So she did what she always did instead. She set a watch. The 9th cairn was the freshest, restocked twice since she came, which meant somebody was still running the line. Talia took Brenskarn and 4 outriders and lay out in the grass a 1/4 mile downwind of it for 6 nights, in the cold, with no fire. On the 6th night, a single rider came up out of the south at a walk, leading a pack pony. They let the rider dismount. They let the rider get the top stones off and both hands full. Then Talia stood up out of the grass 15 feet away, with an arrow already on the string, and said very pleasantly that she would like to talk. The rider went still, then slowly set the skins down, straightened, and turned around. The moon was 3/4 full, and there was no cloud at all, and Talia saw black braids strung with small silver rings, and a horn bow left deliberately hanging on a saddle 20 feet away, and a broad, dark-eyed, entirely unsurprised face she had last seen across the floor of the great hall at Redgate. "You took your time," Iskra Bataar said. Chapter 7. Talia Marek stood in the cold grass with a drawn bow, and the woman who had replaced her was 15 feet away, and the woman was smiling. "You are alone," Talia said. "I am. I have been alone every time I came up this road, which is 11 times, Iskra said. If you had been at all quick about it, we could have had this conversation in the summer. They sat down in the grass, 6 people cross-legged in the dark around a broken cairn. Redgate's well was not dying, Iskra said. It was poisoned. Black salt, out of the deep pans past dry anchor. Bitter, heavy, and it does not wash. Put enough of it down a shaft, and the vein turns iron within a season, and stays turned for years. Well diggers know about it. Nobody else does, because nobody else has any reason to. Talia thought about a gray-black crust on a wagon hub and a thumb she had wiped on her leg twice, and felt the whole autumn slide sideways underneath her. Baird, Talia said. Sevrin Baird, who arrived 19 days later with wagons and an offer, which is remarkable timing for a man who was surveying at the Grey Pan all summer. Say the rest, Talia said. He offered your Alpha King a marriage to my house, and he wrote the terms himself, Iskra said. Mutual defense, no prior claim, and silence. That third clause is the whole machine. Emrys Thorn may not speak one word of the arithmetic, the poison, the price, or the reason. Not to his council, not to his quartermaster, and above all, not to you. If he does, the compact voids the same hour, and 12,000 people start dying on a schedule. He could have told me anyway, Talia said, and her voice came out wrong. I would have kept it. He could have, and Baird knew it, Iskra said. So he added a second thing, out loud, in that hall, before I was brought in. He said a prior claim ends one of 2 ways. It leaves the country, or it stops being a claim. And then he smiled at your king, very politely, the way he smiles at everybody. He threatened her life, Brenskarn said. He priced it, Iskra said. That man does not threaten, he quotes. Talia sat with her hands flat on her knees and made herself breathe. He gave me the fastest horse he owned, she thought. His father's knife. 10 skins, 6 riders, and a written word in front of 400 witnesses, so nobody in that hold could ever call me cast out. And then he pointed me north, up the only line of country on the whole grass sea, with water buried in it every 11 days. He did not trade me. He smuggled me out. And you, Talia said at last. Why does the stronger bride ride 11 times up a dark road to leave water for the woman she replaced? Because he holds my brother, Iskra said. Iskra Bataar, 24 years old. He rode out last spring to see the salt road for himself. He got as far as dry anchor. He has been Baird's guest ever since. My father is 68, and he has not eaten properly since the letter came. She stopped a moment. So when Baird came to my house offering a marriage that would open Redgate's gates to me, I said yes before he finished. Not for the walls, for the road. I wanted inside his compact. I wanted to get close enough to that man to find one written thing with his hand on it. And have you? Talia said. No. I have found 9 caches, 1 Alpha King who is aged 10 years and 4 months, and a war I cannot stop, because I am not married to him yet, and I have no standing until a full moon he keeps postponing, Iskra said. 3 times, Luna. Weather, morning, the harvest. That man is trying to run out a clock that does not exist. Iskra, Talia said. Have you and he ever... No, Iskra said, flat and immediate. Not once, not near it. And I have wanted to say that to your face since the day I walked into that hall. He has not looked at me. Not in the way you mean, not for 1 second. He has been perfectly correct with me and about as warm as a hinge. And the one time he came close to conversation, he asked whether the Sunmark had riders on the northern grass who might come across a woman traveling alone. That is what he wanted from 8,000 riders and 9 live springs. He wanted a search party. Talia laughed, once, and it came out closer to a sob. I looked at you in that hall like you were a piece of meat, Iskra said. I have felt bad about it ever since. Baird was standing 8 feet away watching my face, and I could not afford 1 gram of pity on it. I thought you were sizing me up, Talia said. I was memorizing you, Iskra said. I had 11 cairns to build, and I wanted to know who I was building them for. 4 months of arithmetic reordered itself all at once, the way a column of figures does when you finally find the error at the top. And every number came out different. Then here is where we are, Talia said, loudly enough for all 6 of them, because people need the shape of a thing said plainly. Redgate is dying of thirst. The windmane is being squeezed off the grass. The Sunmark has a hostage at dry anchor. And there is one man standing behind all 3 of us with a ledger. And he did not do any of it with an army. He did it with a well. He needs us to fight, because 2 exhausted peoples have to buy water from him forever. He is not selling water. He is selling thirst. So what does the Luna of the Windmane do about it? Iskra said. We do not fight the war he sold us, Talia said. We go and find his water. Chapter 8. Finding a hidden well is not magic. It is noticing. And noticing is a trade like any other, and Talia Marek had been apprenticed to it since she was 9 years old. She took 11 days, and she used 3 facts. The first was the wagons. Baird's water wagons went out from the Grey Pan heavy, which everyone knew, and they came back heavy, which nobody had thought about. Talia sat above the salt road for 2 days counting ruts, and the ruts running north were as deep as the ruts running south. Unless the whole trade is a rumor with wheels on it, moving the same water in a circle to make a scarce thing look scarcer. The second was the grass. The Grey Pan is dead country, 4 miles of cracked clay and salt scald where nothing grows, which is the last place on the grass sea anybody would look for water. But Talia rode a slow line across its eastern edge at first light on the 6th day, and saw, running through all that gray, a faint green ribbon of sedge no wider than a wagon. Sedge does not grow on salt. Sedge grows where there is sweet water within 8 feet, which meant the vein down there was enormous, and something was letting a little of it leak, and everything else had been shut. The third fact was the stakes. Somebody had gone along that green ribbon and burned every survey marker to the ground. Talia found the char rings and counted them, 41 at even intervals in 2 rows. They took Doran Slate off the salt road on the 11th night. He was Baird's well digger, a nervous gray-brown man of about 40, with the ruined hands of somebody who had spent his life underground, and he did not fight and did not run. He put his palms flat on the ground the moment Brenskarn's riders closed in and asked, in a voice that had been waiting a long time for the question, what happened to him if he told them everything? That depends entirely on the everything, Talia said. So he opened his kit on the ground by lantern light. 6 jointed iron rods for reaching down a cased shaft. A leather sack of gray-black crystal, heavy and greasy and bitter. And a tally stick, a flat, notched piece of ash of the kind salt traders had used on that road for 100 years, because they are harder to forge than paper. Talia held the lantern close and read it. Redgate. Deep work. Paid. He made me do it in 3 visits, Slate said. Spring, midsummer, and once in the dry. It is not 1 dose, it is a course of treatment. I have dug 26 wells in my life. I never spoiled one before, and I have not slept properly since. You will say that in front of both hosts, Talia said. He will kill me, Slate said. Doran, Iskra said. In 9 days, there will be 6,000 armed people on the sedge. Say it in front of them, and you become the safest man on this grass, because every one of them will want you alive to hear it again. They should have had 9 days. they got 4. On the second morning, a rider came into the Windmane camp at a gallop. Redgate had come out. The whole war band. 2,000 spears onto the open grass, moving north to Widow's Ford, and with them a declaration under the Alpha King seal that the Windmane host had violated the closure and that Redgate would meet it at the ford in 3 days to settle the season. "We are 11 days from marching," Talia said. "Somebody sat inside that hold and told him we were already across." And standing there, with the messenger's horse still blowing beside her, Talia understood the last piece of the machine, and it was so simple she almost admired it. Baird had lost control of the timetable, so he had thrown the 2 hosts at each other before either could think. "Bren," Talia said, "eyes on the Salt Road, the North Track, and the Grey Pan. If that man has hired swords, they are coming up from the south, and I want the hour they leave." They came over the last rise above Widow's Ford at dusk on the 3rd day. Redgate was already there, 2,000 spears in good order on the chalk bluff, cook fires in lines, and above them the red banner hanging dead still in the cold. 2 peoples, 1 river, 1 water, and a saddlebag of proof she now had about 11 hours to use. "Send a rider," Talia said. "Parley at the ford at first light, both Alphas and the Luna, and anyone who wants to watch." The answer came back inside the hour, 3 words long, in a hand she knew because she had watched it write out 100 promises in a ledger. "At first light. Agreed." Chapter 9. At moonrise, with 6,000 people asleep on 2 sides of a river, Talia rode out into the middle ground alone. He had come without escort and without armor, sitting the black horse in the flat silver grass halfway between the fires, and she thought, "He has been out here a while. He has been out here since the answer went back." Up close, in the moonlight, Emrys Thorn looked like a building somebody had stopped maintaining. He had lost weight through the face. There were hollows under the gold-amber eyes that had not been there in the spring, and his hands on the reins were the hands of a man who had been cold for a long time. "You cannot say anything," Talia said. "I know that now, so do not try. I am going to talk, and you are going to sit there, and if I get something wrong, you can look at me strangely." "The well was poisoned," Talia said. "The black salt came up the salt road in a water wagon. The man who brought it is asleep in my camp under guard with a notched stick in his kit. 3 clauses: mutual defense, no prior claim, silence. And a 4th thing that was never written down, said out loud in your hall, about how a prior claim ends one of 2 ways. I have drunk out of 9 cairns between the elbow and Longwater," Talia said. "Nell Ott's mark on every skin. That is a season of somebody's ration going north, 11 days at a time, while your own well went bitter. And I want you to know that I counted it, Emrys, because I count everything, and it came to more than you could afford." He did not answer. He could not. She had known he could not before she rode out. Talia unhooked a flask from her saddle and held it out across the space between them. "That is yours," Talia said. "Your grain, your leather, your quartermaster's stamp. I have been carrying your water in my hands since the day you put me outside that gate, and I did not know it." Emrys took the flask. His fingers went over hers and stayed there, and neither of them moved, and Talia felt the whole 4 months come up her throat at once and had to look at the grass. "Say something that is not about the compact," Talia said when she could. "There must be one sentence in the world that man does not own." "I have never wanted anyone but you," Emrys said. "Not for 1 hour. Not in that hall. Not since." "That is not about the compact," Talia said. "No," Emrys said. "It is not." He leaned across the gap between the 2 horses and put his forehead against hers, and stayed there, breathing, with one hand at the back of her neck, and it was not a kiss, and it was very nearly more than she could stand. He smelled of cold iron and horse, and a fire he had not sat down beside. She had 4 months of things to say, and every one of them went out of her head. "Tomorrow you will hear me say something you will not like," Emrys said against her hair. "Let me finish it before you decide." "Emrys," Talia said. "And do not drink out of the sedge above the ford," Emrys said. "Not tomorrow. Not for anything." Then he straightened and turned the black horse and rode back toward his own fires and did not look around. Talia sat out there a while afterward with her hand flat against her breastbone, doing arithmetic. 41 wellheads, 1 notch stick, 1 witness, 1 host on either bank, and 1 polite man with brass scales who was going to be standing in the middle of that ford at first light, expecting to watch 2 peoples spend themselves on each other. "All right," Talia said out loud to the empty silver grass. "Let us see what you are worth without a well." Chapter 10. At first light they walked out onto the gravel bar in the middle of Widow's Ford, 5 people, with 4,000 on one bank and 2,000 on the other, and the river running shallow and cold around everybody's boots. Hallen Skarn came down for the windmain, leaning on Bren's arm, and Talia came down beside him. Emrys Thorn came off the chalk bluff alone. Iskra Bataar rode in from the east and left her riders on the bank, and Sevrin Baird walked out into the middle of that ford in a plain gray coat with his ledger under one arm, set his little brass scales down on a flat stone, and smiled at all of them. "Good," Baird said. "Sensible people. Let us keep this short and nobody has to bleed. The windmain require winter passage and water. Redgate requires that its closure of the fords is not made a joke of in front of the whole grass. Both can be had. Passage on payment, water on payment, and a public acknowledgement of the closure so the Alpha King keeps his authority. My commission is in salt rights, which cost neither of you anything you are currently using. I have written it out already." He wrote it before he came, she thought. He has been carrying the piece around in his coat the whole time. He was always going to sell us the ending as well as the war. "No," Emrys said. "I have considered it since the spring," Emrys said. "Every hour. I am finished." And then the Alpha King of Redgate turned to face his own bank and spoke, and his voice went out across that water to 2,000 of his own people, the way it had always gone to the back of his hall. "Redgate," Emrys said. "Our well did not fail. It was poisoned. Gray-black salt out of the deep pans past dry anchor, put down our shaft in 3 visits by a paid digger, on the order of the man standing beside me in this river." The sound that came off the Redgate bank was not a shout. It was lower and worse than a shout. 19 days after the last dose he rode in with wagons, Emrys said. He offered me the Sunmark oath. He wrote 3 clauses: mutual defense, no prior claim, and silence. The silence is why I have not spoken to you as your king since the day that horn went off. He told me that if I explained 1 word of it to any of you, the compact voided, and every soul behind our wall started dying on a schedule I could count on my hands. And there was a 4th thing, Emrys said. He never wrote it down. He said it in my hall with his hands folded. He said that a prior claim ends one of 2 ways. It leaves the country, or it stops being a claim. I sent her out of that gate to keep her breathing, Emrys said. I gave her my horse and my father's knife, and I pointed her north, up a line I had already begun to bury water on. And then I stood on my own wall and watched her go, and let every one of you believe I had traded her for 8,000 riders. I have carried that 4 months, and I would have carried it 4 more. But I am not going to stand in this river and let her hear 1 more hour of it. Then, in the middle of Widow's Ford, in front of 6,000 people, He unbuckled his sword and laid it flat in the gravel and the moving water, and went down on one knee in front of Talia Marek. "I am not asking you for anything," Emrys said. "You are Luna of the Windmane, and you owe Redgate nothing. I put that in writing myself. I am telling you in front of both hosts because that is where it was taken from you, and that is where it should be given back." "Get up," Talia said. "Emrys, you do not kneel in a river." "And what," Baird said into the silence, "do you imagine you have just bought?" "You have voided your compact," Baird said, still perfectly polite. "As of the words poisoned and salt, my wells are shut to Redgate. Not sold high, shut. Your hold has 40 days of bitter water in the bottom of a bad shaft. No other supply within a month's ride, 12,000 people, and winter 9 days out." He turned a page and made a small mark. "You have bought this woman a public apology. It is a fine apology. It is the most expensive one anybody has ever made on this grass." That was when a woman came down off the Redgate bank into the water. Broad, gray-haired, about 55, in a storekeeper's apron over riding leathers. "Nell Ott," she said to the ford at large, "quartermaster. I want it on the record that I signed out every skin that went north and falsified the ledger to do it. And anybody with an opinion about that can come and find me at the stores where I have been for 30 years. And Talia, standing in the river, felt the whole Redgate bank change its weight, the way a crowd does when it has just decided something all at once and has not said so yet. Then a horn went, thin and flat, from the south. Every head on both banks came around. There was dust on the southern ridge, a great deal of dust, in a long, even line, the way dust comes up under disciplined cavalry that is not hurrying because it does not need to. "Ah," Sevrin Baird said, and closed the ledger at last. "That will be the salt company. 1,200, under contract, paid through the spring. I do dislike having to use them. They are so expensive and so very hard to stop." Chapter 11. 1,200 riders on the southern ridge, 6,000 tired people standing in a river, and a man with brass scales in the middle of it, waiting to be paid. Talia looked at the dust and then at Sevrin Baird and understood exactly what he was selling and exactly what he had forgotten. He had never once had to move. "Hallen," Talia said, "I am holding the road." "The Luna holds the road," Talia said, loudly so both banks got it. "The Windmane does not cross this ford. The Windmane does not fight on this ground. We are going west, every soul, every horse, now, at the trot, and we do not stop until we are standing on the gray pan." "Alpha King," Talia said, turning, "bring your 2,000 and every barrel you own and come with us." "Talia," Emrys said, on his feet now, "say the rest." "His company is cavalry," Talia said, 1,200 horses. There is no water on the southern grass between here and Dry Anchor except what that man puts out for them at Relay. They carry no train because they have never needed one. If we are not here, they are 1,200 horses standing in a dry country 100 miles from a drink." "The gray pan is a lid," Talia said. "There is a green line of sedge running 4 miles through the middle of it, and sedge does not grow on salt. There are 41 burned survey stakes in 2 rows along it. That is not a survey. That is a well field, capped, and it has been capped for 19 years. And it is why one man can sell a river out of 9 wagons and never run dry." For the first time since he walked into Redgate's hall, Sevrin Baird's face did something. It was small, about 1/4 of an inch around the mouth. Talia saw it and felt something in her chest go bright and hard and very calm. "Luna," Baird said, "you are describing a salt pan." I am describing 41 char rings at 90-pace intervals, Talia said. I counted them twice. I am extremely tedious about that sort of thing, and you ought to have found out who you were buying a war from. Then she turned her back on him, which was the only insult she allowed herself all day. Bren, Talia said, take 30 up the river to the top bend before you follow us. Whoever is there, bring them down alive, and bring whatever is in their sacks. It should not have worked. Two nations who had spent 4 months learning to hate each other, told to turn west together on the word of a woman one of them had put outside a gate. It worked because of the horses. The Windmane struck camp and moved in 90 minutes, which was the one thing they had always been better at than anybody alive. And Redgate stood on the bluff and watched 4,000 people vanish westward off the skyline like water going down a drain. Then Nell Ott started shouting at somebody about barrels, and Redgate went after them. Bren caught up at midnight with 4 of Baird's men roped at the wrists and 3 leather sacks of gray-black crystal taken off them at the top bend of the sedge, a mile above where 6,000 people had been standing in the water. He meant to poison the river, Halenskarn said. He meant to poison it under a battle, Talia said, and let both sides find out in a week, and then sell us the cure. Put those with the stick. They came onto the gray pan at the 3rd hour afternoon on a cold gray day with the wind moving dust in sheets. And there it was, exactly as she had left it. 4 miles of dead, cracked clay, and running through the middle of it, thin and impossible and green, a ribbon of sedge. Doran Slate walked the first char ring on his knees and found the cap under 6 inches of packed clay. Lead sheet over a stone collar, sealed with pitch, laid 19 years ago by men who had been paid to forget about it. When the seal came away, the gray pan made a sound like a held breath let go, and water came up out of that hole under its own weight and stood a foot high in the air. It was sweet. That was the thing she remembered. She went down on her knees in the gray clay with everybody else and drank out of her cupped hands, and it was cold and clean and tasted faintly of stone. And behind her, the Redgate men were already tearing the clay off the 2nd ring, and the 3rd, and the whole dead country was coming apart into wells. 41 of them, enough for 2 peoples and 100 years. They brought Sevrin Baird out in front of both hosts at the wellhead because Iskra Bataar had taken him on the north track at dusk with 20 Sunmark riders, 4 miles from the dry anchor road and moving fast. Talia had it, and she held it up. There is a law on the salt road, Talia said, to 6,000 people at the edge of a well field. It is 19 years old, and it is written in the front of this book in this man's own hand, because he wanted it there so nobody would ever tamper with his water. To spoil a well is the one crime on the Grass Sea with only one sentence. Doran Slate. Slate came forward and said all of it, with his ruined hands shaking, and left nothing out. They laid the rest in front of everybody in order. The notched ash stick that read Redgate, deep work, paid. The 3 sacks off the top bend of the sedge. Nell Ott's falsified store ledger. The lead cap, the pitch, the char rings. And 41 wells under a country that had spent 19 years being told it was dry. The salt company never came off the ridge. Their captain sat his horse on the edge of the gray pan a long while and looked at 6,000 people standing around a well field his employer had sworn did not exist. Then he sent one rider down to ask, politely, whether the water was open to anybody not currently holding a sword. The salt company dismounted and watered 1,200 horses, and that was the end of the war. They stayed on the gray pan 11 days. And in those 11 days, the Grass Sea quietly stopped being what it had always been. 6,000 people camped in one field around 41 open wells, and there was no way to keep 2 hosts apart when everybody had to queue at the same water. Somebody started a horse race on the fourth evening, and Bren Scarn lost it badly to a Redgate stable hand named Pell Ott, who had one arm in a sling and rode anyway. They called it the Water Law, in the end, because nobody could think of anything grander, and because plain words last longer. 41 wells at the Grey Pan, held in common by all three peoples, forever. Free passage on the fords for any pack moving between grass and winter ground. And one office to keep the whole thing honest, a warden of the wells, who would count the draw at every head twice a year and answer to no throne at all. Emrys came to her on the 9th evening. He came alone and on foot, which for the Alpha King of Redgate was a walk of about a mile through a camp full of people who had spent a season calling him an enemy, and Talia watched him do it the whole way. Nobody spat. Nobody cheered either. They just watched him come. "I have something to say, and it is not an apology," Emrys said. "I made the apology in the river. This is different." "Say it," Talia said. "Redgate will hold to the water law whether you ever speak to me again or not," Emrys said. "That is not a bargaining piece, and I want it clear before the rest. And the rest is this. I am not asking you to come back inside a wall. I know exactly what that wall cost you. So if you will have me, I will give the high seat to whoever the pack chooses, and I will ride with the Windmane, and I will be nobody's king. I have thought about it for 9 days, and I cannot find the part where I mind." "No," Talia said. "You are not going to hand me your kingdom to prove a point," Talia said. 12,000 people in that hold learned this season what it feels like to have their water in one man's pocket, and you are the only person alive they will let take the gates down. So here is my counteroffer, and you should know I have already put it to Holland, and he said yes before I finished. The Windmane winters at Longwater and rides the circle, and I hold the road, because that is my job, and I am good at it," Talia said. "Redgate keeps its walls and takes the gates off them, and the market stands open in the yard all year, and the well house is common ground. 2 seats, 1 road, and you and I split the year between them, and if that means half my nights are in a stone room and half yours are under a hide roof in the rain, then we are both going to be slightly uncomfortable for the rest of our lives, and I am willing." "That is the most romantic thing anybody has ever said to me," Emrys said. "I am saving the rest," Talia said. He crossed the ground between them and took her face in both hands, and this time his hands were steady, and the kiss was slow and unhurried, and about 4 months late. And somewhere off to the left, a Windmane outrider whooped and was immediately hushed by his mother. They did not come out of her tent until well after the fires had burned down, and the grass sea, for once, minded its own business. 3 years on, this is how it all stands, and it is worth telling in order, because on the grass sea, people still argue about the details. Sevrin Baird was tried at the wellhead 9 days after the Grey Pan opened, in front of all three peoples, under the law he had written himself and put in the front of his own ledger. Dorn Slate gave evidence. So did the 4 men taken at the top bend of the sedge with the black salt on them. So did Nell Ott, with her falsified storebook open on the table. The penalty on the salt road for spoiling water had one name: the Long Walk. And Baird had said it himself 19 years earlier so that nobody would ever touch his wells. They gave him 1 full skin of water and a good pair of boots, and they put him out on foot. And outriders found him 11 days later at a dry marker 40 miles south, and he was dead. His charter was burned at the wellhead. His scales went into the bottom of the first well he had sealed. Dorn Slate was not hanged because Talia argued against it and won. He was sentenced to dig, and he dug for 3 years under guard, and he opened 19 of the 41 wells with his own ruined hands, and at the end of it, the warden of the wells gave him a paper saying his debt was closed. He lives at the Grey Pan now and keeps the shafts he once spoiled. The salt company disbanded that winter for the simple reason that nobody was left to pay them. Around 90 of them took the water oath and stayed on as well keepers under the water law. Emrys Bataar came home. Bren Scarn took 40 outriders to dry anchor the same week and found him thin, filthy, furious, and entirely alive in a storeroom behind the salt scales. He is 27 now, and he rules the Sunmark in his father's place, and the ninefold springs went into the water law in the second year, freely in front of witnesses. Iskra Bataar married Bren Scarn in the spring after the war, and Talia stood up with her, and the horse racing went on for 4 days. Redgate's great well came back. It took 2 seasons of digging out and flushing, and on a cold morning in the 3rd spring it ran sweet again, and the whole hold queued up in the yard to taste it. They keep it as a common cistern now, and nobody drinks from it before the children do. The gates came off Redgate's red arch in the first summer. They were not destroyed. Emrys had them laid flat in the market yard as a floor so that everybody who comes to trade walks over them, and the arch has stood open every day and every night since. Talia Marek married Emrys Thorn out on the open grass between Redgate and the Grey Pan in the 2nd autumn, in front of about 7,000 people and a great many horses. She wore riding leathers. She was very clear about that. She is Luna of the Windmane still, because the pack has never once suggested otherwise, and she is Luna of Redgate as well, and Warden of the Wells besides, which is the job she actually likes. She counts the draw at all 41 heads twice a year. She has never yet found a number she was happy with, and Emrys says that is the whole point of her. They spend the cold half of the year behind the open arch at Redgate, and the warm half riding the circle with the pack, and their daughter, who is called Sorrel, and who is 2.5, has slept under both roofs and has strong opinions about which one is better. It is the tent. It has always been the tent. Kestrel, the grey mare, is 14 years old now, and does no work at all. She lives in the market yard at Redgate, just inside the open arch, and the children feed her a great deal more than they should, and nobody has the heart to stop them. Hallen Scarn stepped down as alpha in the 3rd year, and did not die of it, which he tells everybody was the surprise of his life. He lives in a wagon near the herd, and he holds the baby whenever he is allowed, which is most days, and he has told Sorrel the entire story of the Grey Pan roughly 1,100 times. And in the summer just gone, on a warm night with the arch standing open below them and the whole market yard quiet, Talia took her husband's hand and put it flat against her, and told him there would be another one before the snow. Emrys Thorn, Alpha King of Redgate, a man famous across 3 peoples for having a face that gave nothing away, sat down on the step and put his head in his hands and laughed until he had to wipe his eyes. "Write it down," Talia said. "You always write everything down." "I do not need to," Emrys said. "This one is not a promise. This one is already true." Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Emrys stayed silent for a whole season to keep Talia alive, and that silence cost her her home, her name in that hold, and 4 months of believing she had been traded away. Was he right to say nothing at that gate? Or should he have told her the truth and let her choose the risk herself? Pick one. You cannot say both. Let me know in the comments. I read every one. If you'd like more stories, there are plenty more on the channel. Much love, Sophie.